Hello, I'm Luke Coasters, and in this video I'll be continuing my series in which I review my top 20 coasters, and this review is of my 13th favourite coaster, Twisted Cyclone, an RMC iBox coaster at Six Flags over Georgia. When Twisted Cyclone was announced in August 2017, nobody was hyped for it. For most, the layout was disappointing as it only made 2 laps around the structure, despite Wicked Cyclone, a similar RMC conversion, having 3 laps. Furthermore, the ride was overshadowed by other RMCs opening that year, and it's clear to see why. Steel Vengeance, the most statistically impressive RMC, and one of the most anticipated coasters ever, also opened in 2018, and the prototype Raptors also debuted this year, which had been one of the most anticipated coaster models of the decade. Twisted Timbers was another RMC that opened this year, and while it wasn't anything groundbreaking, it was still way more impressive than Twisted Cyclone. As it turns out, the animation for Twisted Cyclone didn't do the coaster any justice, as many elements were altered, most notably the addition of another airtime hill following the third inversion, and also massive changes in profiling to the airtime hill preceding and succeeding the first overbank turn. But despite these changes, nobody cared much about the ride. When the ride finally opened on May 25th, 2018, it received many positive reviews, and everyone was surprised by how good and intense the coaster was. However, Twisted Cyclone was still perceived as one of the weakest RMCs because of its weak stats, with a height of only 100 foot, a top speed of 50 miles per hour, and track length of a mere 2,500 foot. This is on the lower end of RMCs, especially for the duration. However, I could overlook these issues and enjoy the ride for what it was. To start off, the ride is well presented for a Six Flags coaster. There is subtle theming which helps the ride fit into the surrounding area, and when I actually went, the operations were great and the queue line didn't exceed 40 minutes, allowing me to get a few rides in on it. However, the queue line itself lacks theming, however that didn't bother me too much. When I rode this coaster in August 2018, there was assigned seating, but if you ask for a row, you were usually given it, and for almost all of my rides I sat in the back, which was in my opinion the best row on this coaster. I love the first gen RMC trains this coaster uses. They look really nice with the car theme, and they're also pretty comfortable. While many don't like the shin guards, I don't mind them as they help to not get stapled, and the lap bar itself doesn't cause any discomfort except for when completely stapled. But when I went, the staff didn't push down too hard on restraints, which allowed me to enjoy the coaster's airtime. When the train dispatches, it enters a fun pre-lift section. The train heads straight forwards before going into an unbanked left-hand turn which dips down halfway through. This leads into a brief right-hand turn which has subtle laterals, which then goes into a bunny hill which turns left, giving soft laterals and mild floater, but it isn't too noticeable. The train goes into a slow but fairly snappy outward bank turn which has no airtime but a fun punch of lateral forces. The train then backs to the left and navigates a small left-hand turn which leads into the lift hill. This relift section is one of my favourites, mainly because of the laterals it has, but it's nothing outstanding. However, it does tease the insane and unorthodox experience that is about to come. The ascent on this lift hill is fairly slow, but it builds up the suspense before the main part of the coaster. On this lift hill you don't really get a good view, as the ride is so small that it barely reaches above the tree line. You then crest the lift hill and begin to descend the 100 foot drop, and despite the small stature of it, it is insane. The drop has an insanely steep armour-glove descent of 75 degrees, meaning that the crest of the lift hill has to be sharp, giving the drop insane ejector in the back. This is added to by a small left-hand turn during the descent, which has great laterals which throw you to the right. Every time I've rode, I was caught by surprise by these great laterals in this sudden twist, adding to the thrill. You are just violently flung out of your seat while being pushed to the right, making it one of the most aggressive drops I've experienced. It feels very similar to the drop on Twisted Colossus, but even more aggressive, but unfortunately much less sustained as the drop is so short. While descending, the train dives under the track of the wave turn later on the ride, and one particular steel ledger creates an amazing head chopper, which is added to by the fact that you're being flung towards it and pinned against your restraint because of the airtime. The ride then flies through some more of the wooden structure under the wave turn while entering the first valley. Like many RMCs, this valley lacks any strong positive forces, but before you know it, the train is rising back up into the first inversion. This element, the reverse cobra roll, is actually comprised of 2 inversions. The element starts off by traversing a steep ascent while the train completes an inverting 0G roll, which gives great hang time in the back, and in the front it's fairly whippy. But in the second half of the inversion, the train makes a more shallow descent while entering a raised up turn. This first inversion is nothing too special, and the subsequent turn, while having subtle laterals, isn't intense either. After navigating this 180 degree turn, the train rises up slightly and completes the second inversion of this element, which is the complete opposite of the first. The train goes down a steep 0G roll, which in the front gives great hang time, but in the back it gives perfect 0G, which makes it one of my favourite RMC rolls. You're just floating out of your seat while twisting through the wooden structure, and because the descent is so long, this moment is really sustained. While the inversion isn't aggressive, the unique sensation of floating through a roll makes this inversion stand out to me, and while I usually prefer more aggressive inversions, I couldn't help but love this particular 0G roll. The train then rises up into the wave turn. While ascending, the train banks 90 degrees to the right while rising above the track of the first drop. When the train is banked at 90 degrees, it turns back on itself while descending, which leads to a great moment of ejector airtime and laterals. It feels somewhat like an outward bank turn, but at the same time this element is so different, and honestly it's quite hard to compare the sensation of a wave turn to any other element on a coaster. While airtime isn't the most aggressive or strong, only being weak ejector, the fact that you're on your side while traversing this airtime moment makes it so much more fun. As the turn is so large, the airtime is really sustained and it builds up during the hill, starting off as floating in the first half, but building up into ejector during the descent out of the element. While the train exits this element and banks to 0 degrees, there is also a great head chopper, and you receive a nice dose of laterals which push you to the side a bit. The train then rises up into the first airtime hill and flies over the crest. In this moment you get some strong and violent airtime which launches you out of your seat. This moment feels very similar to step up into the MCBR on Steel Vengeance, except on this coaster the airtime strength is more consistent throughout the train, as the hill is lower to the ground and more drawn out. This hill is stronger than most RMCs and compares in strength to the step up into the quad down on Lightning Rod, which is insane, especially for a coaster of this size. The train then whips to the left and through a compact overbank, giving good laterals which push you to the right. The train has so much speed going through this overbank, but despite this it doesn't have too many positives, and after acing this overbank the train rises up into another airtime hill, and this hill is absolutely insane. The descent on this hill is much longer than the ascent, so in the back the airtime is nuts. While it is great in the front, the back has stronger and more sustained airtime. This is by far my favourite moment on this coaster. You're flung out of your seat and pinned to your restraint for a second before slamming back into your seat. The transition into this strong ejector is so sudden, making the element feel more aggressive, and this is added to by the absurd strength of the airtime. I know this might sound crazy, but this hill actually feels very similar to the second hill of the quad down on Lightning Rod. It matches the strength of that element, but isn't quite as aggressive as that insane moment on Lightning Rod, but that is traded off for how sustained it is, as the lead into this hill is much larger on Twisted Cyclone, which allows for the airtime to last for longer. The train then flies into a fairly tall 0G roll, which is decent, but it doesn't match the previous inversion on this coaster. This inversion has soft laterals throughout the duration of it, but it mainly focuses on hang time, which it does deliver, but the hang time isn't too outstanding. It's a fun inversion, but I don't think the coaster needed it. Seeing as the coaster already has such a short track length, 3 inversions might have been too much, and I would have much rather seen this inversion replaced with another airtime moment, as for me that would have provided more of a thrill. Nonetheless, this is a fun inversion, but it does take away from the breakneck pace of the previous elements. After exiting this inversion, the train snaps into a sequence of 2 small bunny hills, both of which launch you into your restraint in rapid succession. Neither of these 2 hills are sustained, which many don't like, however I can appreciate these aggressive, relentless hills which throw you around loads. Before you even have time to process the insanity of the first hill, you are thrown into the second. I love the snappy, almost jackhammering sensation these 2 bunny hills give, but I would definitely prefer the second hill as it's larger and more sustained. Also during the second hill of these 2, there is an amazing head chopper, as on the descent out of this hill the train dives into the structure. These 2 back-to-back bunny hills are some of my favourite of these tiny bunny hills on RMCs, as they are so strong and aggressive. They feel kind of similar to the final run of bunny hills on Steel Vengeance, or the bunny hills on Untamed, except on this coaster they are much stronger. Once in the structure, the train flies to the left and through an overbank, which is so aggressive. There is a strong yank of laterals which violently forces you to the right while the train navigates this undersized element. The lateral slightly decrease as you exit the element, but they are still sustained as you rise up into a twisted hill. In this element, you're flung out of your seat while being thrown from right to left, making for one of the most aggressive elements on this coaster. This hill is very similar to the previous bunny hill. The airtime is just as strong, except on this hill you also have the laterals jerking you around. As soon as you fall back into your seat, the train banks to the left again and enters a snappy left-hand turn, which has a strong punch of laterals which shove you to the right before entering the brake run. I love the ending of this coaster as the final few elements all pack strong laterals, so you're constantly being thrown from one side to another, with each subsequent moment of laterals getting even stronger. You're honestly being thrown around like a ragdoll, and that one twisted airtime moment adds to the variety during the barrage of lateral forces. I also love how the train flies through the structure in the finale. While it doesn't match that on Steel Vengeance, the head choppers still slightly add to the thrill of the ending of this amazing coaster. Every time the train slammed on the brakes, I was blown away. I didn't expect such a small coaster to deliver such a punch. This coaster is honestly relentless, with the only so-called dead spots being the inversions, which are still thrilling elements. I love this coaster because every single element delivers strong forces, and the airtime on it is some of RMC's best. While it isn't quite as strong as the airtime on Storm Chaser, it honestly isn't too far off. While the coaster is non-stop and has amazing pacing, this came at a cost, which is the duration. While I was blown away after every ride in this coaster, I was still left wanting it to be longer, and it's the only coaster I felt like the duration has brought it down for me. However, I do understand why it isn't longer, as it would have greatly harmed the pacing, not to mention the fact that they didn't have enough structure to work with to add a third lap. Considering these facts, I don't mind the flaw of the duration too much, as a blistering pace and powerful airtime makes up for this. Additionally, the short length of this ride also helps to remedy an issue common on RMCs. and that is their disappointing morning rides. As the layout is so short, the ride doesn't slow down as much during the coaster, meaning that there is very little difference in speed from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, so the first few rides of the day will almost be as insane as the final few. If you care for just straight up aggressive coasters, then this ride is definitely for you, but if you prefer longer, more all-rounders experiences, then I can completely understand why you wouldn't like this coaster that much. Its short duration makes it so polarizing, as there are many coasters which are just shy of matching the belligerence of Twisted Cyclone, but have a long duration. And there are even a few coasters which are just as sane as this coaster, or even more so, but still have a longer duration. Another aspect Twisted Cyclone is lacking in is positive Gs, but most RMCs are the same, as Alan Chilkey doesn't like to incorporate too many positives into his projects with RMC to make his coasters more rideable, which he succeeds in doing. And the fact that Twisted Cyclone has strong forces in pretty much every other direction makes up for the fact that it doesn't feature strong positives, so I personally wouldn't consider it too much of a downside. As you can tell, I love this coaster. It was surprisingly good. I went in expecting a fun but forgettable coaster, but I left with what was at the time a top 5 coaster for me. Since then I have ridden more RMCs, a couple of which were even more aggressive than this coaster, causing this ride to fall down in my rankings, but that doesn't mean it's a bad coaster. Twisted Cyclone is yet again another coaster that proves that statistics aren't integral to a coaster's quality, and even with statistics lacking in every single department, a strong layout and good forces can make a coaster great. Everything from the drop to the final few turns on this coaster are flawlessly executed, with the exception of the inversions. That's more of a matter of me not being the biggest fan of inversions in general. Yet this ride still features some of my favourite RMC inversions. While it would be nice for this coaster to be longer, the duration doesn't ruin the ride for me, and it allows the ride to deliver right until the very end of the layout. It's hard giving this coaster a final score, as the layout is almost perfect with the exception of the duration, but I'm going to have to give it a strong score of 95 out of 100. So, what do you think of this polarising RMC? Give your opinion on it in the comment section below, and I'd greatly appreciate it if you liked and subscribed for more rollercoaster based content.